right. Well, hello and welcome to the National Corvette Museum and to the NCM Michelin Bash Event. I hope you guys are all having a great bash. This is a new thing for us. You're at the very first one of these things. This is a artifact pit stop where we're going to be bringing out actual artifacts from our collection, many times for the first time ever really seen by the public, and allow you guys to view these things in person. For many years we've had this very famous letter, the letter that we call the turning point, which is sort of the Magna Carta in the automotive world, and it really was a turning point for Chevrolet as they began to look at their performance ability with Zora Arkus-Duntov pushing the way. And this document, to set the scene a little bit, Zora Arkus-Duntov, as many of you already know, came over to the United States, started a company called Arden Manufacturing Corporation, Arden Manufacturing Corporation. And he, with his brother Zora, began to develop performance parts for the Ford Flathead V8. But he saw the 53 Corvette at the Motorama, was intrigued by it, and then he went in, wrote a letter to Ed Cole that ended up getting him a job at GM. So far so good, okay? So as he was there, he was hired on. At the time, Ed Cole was the chief engineer of Chevrolet. And so Ed kind of had a good rapport with Zora. And Zora ended up writing a letter when he was realizing that GM was not getting on the ball when it came to performance. The Ford was kind of beating them in every aspect. I printed out this copy of this letter, and you can see by this one paragraph where he says about magazines that day, from cover to cover, they're all full of Fords. This is not surprising then that the majority of hot rodders are eating, sleeping, dreaming, modified Fords. They know Ford parts stem to stern better than the Ford people themselves. He goes on to urge Ed and Marie Solly, who was the research and development engineer, he began to urge them to get on the ball. And that is what this letter is all about. So, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, to kind of build on that part of the story, you know, Zora is writing this letter, and the part that Bob just read, Zora is probably the guy that knows this Ford engine. He's talking about himself, essentially. Knowing the Ford engine better than Ford engineers, he created an overhead valve conversion for this engine to become even more powerful than it had become, or that it was from Ford Motor Company itself. You know, the Flathead V8, for anybody that was in the Corvette Powered seminar this morning with me, that engine was a turning point in American and automotive history. A monoblock V8 engine being produced in a single casting for the first time. It was capable of so much, and people like Arden, you know, Zora and his brother, only made it even better. So Zora knew this thing. He's really talking about himself in this letter. He's talking about everybody in the hot rod community, but he's talking about himself and his brother in the fact that people had gotten to know the engine and what it was capable of, and GM didn't have that same street cred, let's call it. They did not have an engine that hot rodders and those people that wanted to build engines could do, you know, anything with. And that's, I find it interesting too that, you know, Zora writes a letter to get hired at Chevrolet, right? And then once he's there, he writes another letter basically saying, so I'm glad you guys hired me, but yeah, everything's wrong. Let's just reinvent this system. But, I mean, that's perfect, right? I mean, this is a guy that knows racing inside and out and what Ford is doing inside and out. And he knew Corvette had the ability to be something, but it needed a V8 engine. So I think that's some of the kind of interesting things that Zora's doing to try to draw more attention to the V8, the need for the V8.
You might see after this is all over, we actually have one of those Ford Flathead V8s with a replica Arden heads with it as well, so you can kind of see that connection for yourself. To fast forward now to 2008, We've had this duplicate letter here all these years. People actually thought that that was the original letter for many years because it had yellowed. We just got finished redoing this. But we thought, wouldn't it be cool to bring out the actual letter? The way we got this letter, though, was also pretty cool as well. Herb Fischel in 2008 became a Hall of Famer, and he wanted to give the museum something very special to commemorate this moment in his life. And this is a brief passage of the letter that he sent us. So this, you could call this the Herb letter. Zora Duntov was a pure racer. In December of '53, he sent a letter to Chevrolet Chief Engineer Marie Solity called Thoughts Pertaining to Used Hot Rodders and Chevrolet. The document was first brought to attention by the renowned Chevy performance rider who Zora had presented a copy to. Zora foresaw the potential of this small block V8 engine and the need for readily engineered parts. He believed that with his initiative, Chevrolet would displace Ford as the engine of choice for hot rodders and racers, which it did, of course. Thanks to this prophecy, the small block Chevy V8 became the most universally accepted racing engine in the world today. GM earns millions annually selling versions of this engine and performance parts. Zora walked unannounced into my office in the early 90s and said, Herb, you do a good job. You should have this. Imagine the feeling he got when he got this handed to him. And what he gave him was the document that is in this box. This is the most important document in the history of Chevrolet performance, and it belongs in the Corvette Museum. So, without further ado, this is the famous Zora letter. Now you will note, Leah, who is in charge of all of this, she has lost her voice, but she would want me to tell you that all of this is acid-free, archival materials that we're using to store this.
Yeah, and I was just going to jump on that because Leah can't talk today because she's lost her voice. But you'll see the letter here, and of course, as everyone knows, we've had the facsimile up for many, many, many years. As Bob said, kind of redid the graphics recently on it. But the reason we do that in the museum world is because a lot of this paper, especially some of the historic paper from the early days, coming up through, this is acidic paper, and it has a lot of preservation needs. We store it in archival sleeves. We store it in boxes away from UV light because UV light and the acidity of the paper, it all deteriorates over time. So as a museum, it is our job to preserve the collection as long as possible and care for it the best we can. So by keeping the original letter off exhibit and only bringing it out every now and then to show it, we're actually preserving it. We're not trying to hide it from history. That's why we do make facsimiles. But to really preserve this, as Bob said, probably the most important document in Chevrolet performance history, we want to care for it properly in the archives. So that's why you see it, in the sleeves, in a box. It's actually labeled what's in the box, so we know exactly where it is, we track it, and we care for it. And you can see actually the browning that you see, the yellowish browning, that's from acidity. That's from the paper, the acidity in the paper. So we try to make sure that we reduce the chances of that getting worse by storing it the way we do here at the museum. But yeah, to go back to Bob's point about Herb, and Zora walking in and giving him this document, I don't know that there was maybe a greater compliment for Herb and what he did for Chevrolet performance and racing than for Zora to give him this letter. And then for it to come to us was absolutely incredible, and we are proud that we can be the caretakers of this letter and actually bring it out for everyone to see once in a while. But of course, you can always read what it says on the facsimile. So, I don't know that there's much else to say about it, but we do want to give everybody an opportunity to come up and take a closer look. Obviously, we do ask that you don't touch it, or anything like that. We want to prevent any damage that could occur. But please do feel free to come up, take a closer look, and obviously if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Bob, anything else you want to?
No, that just about covers it. When I spoke with her, he said this had been on file the whole time he had it. So this is probably the first time it's ever been seen in public ever. So you're going to lay your eyes on the very letter that changed history, and you'll be the first ones to do it. So enjoy.
She's just been yelling at her daughter too much.
Oh boy. Toddlers, I guess that's the way it is, huh?
Headed to Nashville from, that's your new job?
Yes.
Young lady.